No one expected the sun-scorched sidewalk in Maplewood Estates to become a stage for heartbreak. It was a cul-de-sac of immaculate lawns, custom mailboxes, and pastel houses that stood at near-identical heights. The headlights of cars glinted off the strict lines of driveway boundaries. Boundary lines the Homeowners Association, or HOA, guarded religiously. Residents joked that you couldn't so much as trim a hedge without filing the correct paperwork. To the outside world, Maplewood Estates looked like a postcard of comfortable suburban living. Inside, however, an undercurrent of tension rippled. On a bright Saturday morning, Diana and William Hadleys sat on their porch swing, sipping coffee and chatting about their 8-year-old son, Toby. The breeze carried the scent of lilacs mixed with freshly cut grass. Toby had always been a curious child, forever exploring new crafts or rummaging for bugs. He had a wide, mischievous grin that could make a grumpiest neighbor smile. Except maybe for Maureen Pollard, the HOA president. Even Toby's charm couldn't cut through her granite-like resolve. But the real concern in the Hadley household was Toby's epilepsy. They had discovered it when he was 5, after he collapsed at a birthday party, convulsing and unable to speak. Months of doctor visits confirmed that Toby's condition required daily medications and close monitoring. He was prone to sudden seizures triggered by stress, lack of sleep, or even bright flashing lights. Still, Toby lived his life with the determination of a happy-go-lucky kid. His parents had done everything possible to keep him safe, from posting emergency phone numbers around the house to educating neighbors. Diana looked up from her coffee. Should we review Toby's new medication schedule with him again? William patted her hand. We'll go over it after breakfast. He's a bright kid. He'll remember. The conversation shifted as they noticed Maureen Pollard shuffle past on the sidewalk. She carried a clipboard, her ever-present symbol of authority. She wore crisp beige slacks, a floral blouse buttoned to her collarbone, and a scowl that looked as if it had been permanently etched into her face. At a glance, one might mistake her for a stoic librarian. But Maureen was feared for her letters of complaint over the slightest transgressions. A fence an inch too high, grass not trimmed to code, a decorative lawn statue that didn't conform. "Morning, Ms. Pollard," Diana called out, maintaining the politeness expected in Maplewood Estates. Maureen gave a curt nod and tapped her pen against the clipboard. "I need to remind you, the sign you've placed about Toby's condition might be considered an eyesore. We have a rule against signage not pre-approved by the board. Consider this a warning." Diana's eyes narrowed. "It's not a yard sale sign, Maureen. It's information explaining Toby's seizure protocol. You know about his condition." Maureen pursed her lips. "I'm aware, but we have standards in this neighborhood." She snapped her clipboard shut and walked away without so much as a goodbye. William forced a tight-lipped smile, trying to calm his wife. "Don't let her get to you," he whispered. "Our priority is Toby's well-being, not placating Maureen." Toby bounded out the front door just then, wearing neon-colored sneakers and a baseball cap. "Mom, Dad, can I go bike riding?" William glanced at the child's helmet hanging from the porch railing. "Sure thing, bud. Just make sure you wear your helmet and don't go too far. You're Mom, and I want to keep an eye on you." "'Kay." Toby strapped on his helmet and raced off down the driveway, the wheels of his bike leaving faint trails on the smooth concrete. The father and mother watched, a mixture of delight and concern flickering in their eyes. Toby was at the age where he wanted independence, but neither parent could quell the worry that came with his seizures. They had taken every precaution. He wore a medical alert bracelet, and they made sure that neighbors were aware of his condition. Well, those neighbors who cared enough to listen. Maureen, for one, was all about community standards but rarely showed genuine concern for actual people. Not long before, she had dismissed Toby's health condition at an HOA meeting with a flippant remark. "Kids are resilient." That had stung Diana more than any violation ticket or strongly worded letter. Some 15 minutes later, William and Diana could hear the sweet notes of Toby's laughter from down the block. Then, just as Diana went to refill their coffee mugs, that laughter stopped abruptly. Instead, a higher-pitched panic cry rang out. Diana and William froze. They knew Toby's voice so well they could distinguish its every tone. And that cry was the unmistakable sound of fear. They tore off their porch in a heartbeat, ignoring the coffee cups that clattered to the ground, liquid splashing across the porch steps. Running past identical shrubs and perfectly edged lawns, their feet hammered the pavement. Their eyes searched desperately for their son. Suddenly, they spotted Toby hunched over his handlebars at the intersection, his bike wobbling. The child's small chest heaved with ragged breaths. The helmet slid awkwardly on his head, as if he could barely keep upright. Diana's mind raced. A seizure in progress? Or was it near miss? Toby's arms trembled, and his face was pale. Terrified, she glanced around for any neighbors who could help, but no one rushed forward, except for Moren, who had just stepped out from behind a well-manicured hedge. Diana waved frantically. "Call 911. Moren, please." But Moren just stood there, clipboard clasped, her expression mild and skeptical. "He's just being dramatic. Toby always fusses. I see him biking around just fine every day." William's voice cracked with urgency. "He has seizures, you know that." Moren shrugged, taking a half step back. "It doesn't look like one to me. He's probably playing it up for attention." At that, Diana's heart thundered. Toby had started convulsing, sliding sideways off his bike seat. The entire world slowed to a surreal crawl. In that instant, it was chillingly clear. No matter how stringent the HOA rules were, no matter how neat the lawns or how polite the greetings, this community had a gaping lack of empathy, made concrete by Moren's cold, unfeeling eyes. And right then, Toby's body went slack, and a seizure overcame him fully. The convulsions rippled through Toby's small frame, twitches and tremors that turned his limbs into flailing marionette strings. Diana and William dropped to their knees on the asphalt, oblivious to the heat radiating from the sun-baked ground. His eyes had rolled back slightly, and his lips formed silent gasps. Moren's voice floated from somewhere behind them, muffled by Diana's terror. "It can't be that serious," the HOA president muttered. "You people always overreact." Diana didn't care to respond. She held Toby's head in her hands, doing her best to keep him from injuring himself. William was already punching 911 into his phone, hands shaking so badly he had to try twice to dial. The seconds felt like hours. After an agonizing minute and a half, Toby's body began to still. It wasn't the relief that Diana hoped for. He lay limp, breathing shallowly. His eyelids fluttered but didn't fully open. She called out his name in a soft, soothing tone, as if her voice alone could guide him back to safety. William kept the operator informed, describing the location and Toby's condition, voice breaking each time Toby let out a soft moan. An ambulance siren blared in the distance, picking up speed. Neighbors began peeking through blinds and stepping onto porches, drawn by either concern or curiosity. A few, like Mildred Chong, an elderly widow from the next street, hurried over with water and towels. Mildred immediately kneeled beside Diana, patting Toby's forehead. "Poor dear," she whispered, eyes brimming with worry. Moren, clipboard still in hand, didn't budge. "I suppose I can guide the paramedics in," she offered stiffly, as if doing a great favor. She strolled to the corner, ignoring the scathing looks from other neighbors. When the EMTs arrived, the block seemed to hold its breath. They lifted Toby onto a stretcher, hooking up a portable oxygen mask while quickly checking his vitals. Diana gripped William's shoulder, tears streaking her cheeks. William tried to stay strong, nodding as the paramedic rattled off questions. Toby's age, seizure history, medication records. Each response was mechanical, forced through the swirl of anxiety. As Toby was placed into the ambulance, Diana scrambled inside with him. William lingered just long enough to thank Mildred and shoot Moren a furious look. "Don't ever stand by again," he snapped. "You heard me?" This was real. Moren's eyes flickered, something like annoyance or embarrassment crossing her face. But it was too faint, too fleeting to know for sure. In the emergency room, Toby was stabilized with anti-seizure medication. The attending physician, Dr. Roy, explained calmly that Toby likely had a breakthrough seizure, which can happen even on medication, especially if the child experienced a sudden source of stress. Has Toby been experiencing anxiety or any changes at home? Dr. Roy asked gently. Diana and William glanced at each other. He tries not to show it, William said softly. But the neighborhood has been tense lately. The HOA has been giving us a lot of trouble. Diana's voice quivered. We put up a sign to inform neighbors about Toby's condition, in case something happened. And she, the HOA president, wanted it taken down. Toby overheard us arguing. The doctor nodded sympathetically. Stress can be a trigger, especially in children. It might be subtle, but it builds. Later that evening, Toby's eyes opened in a flutter of drowsy awareness. He smiled weakly at the sight of his parents. Diana ran her fingers through his hair, feeling an immense weight lift from her chest. William brushed tears from his face. You're okay, Diana murmured, half to herself, half to Toby. You scared us. Toby swallowed and tried to speak, voice raspy. Don't be mad at me. William's heart clenched. No, buddy. We're not mad. We love you. We're just worried. Despite the relief at Toby's recovery, a churn of frustration lingered in Diana's mind. She couldn't forget how coldly Moren had dismissed Toby's condition. Worse yet, the notion that Toby's own awareness of that hostility might be exacerbating his seizures gnawed at her. People were supposed to come together in a community. Maplewood Estates' rules and regulations might have been intended to keep property values high and ensure tidy aesthetics. But what about protecting a child? After Toby was discharged, Diana and William decided it was time to confront the HOA board in a more official capacity. They had enough medical documentation to justify their sign. Maybe there was a special needs exception or an emergency waiver. All they wanted was peace of mind, a guarantee that Toby's condition wouldn't be ignored or minimized again. A week passed. Toby returned to his routines, albeit with more breaks and a watchful eye from his parents. One late afternoon, William found an envelope taped to their front door, a formal notice from the Maplewood Estates Homeowners Association. It wasn't a friendly note hoping for Toby's speedy recovery, nor was it an apology. Instead, it was a violation citation for unauthorized signage, with a possible fine. Diana read it 3 times to be sure her eyes weren't deceiving her. Unbelievable, she seethed. Toby was in the living room, working on a jigsaw puzzle, oblivious to the tension thickening behind him. William paced, fists clenched. Is this even legal? Didn't we tell them it was for medical reasons? Yes, but apparently that doesn't matter to them, Diana snapped. She glanced at the last line. If the sign is not removed within 7 days, the HOA board will pursue further action. Later that same evening, the Hadleys knocked on neighbor after neighbor's door, collecting signatures on a petition. Some families were more than willing to help, fully aware of Toby's condition and outraged by the HOA's stance. Others were uneasy, not wanting to cross Moren. Still others, like Mr. Jefferson across the street, refused with the excuse that we need to keep a unified look in the neighborhood. By the time night fell, they had enough signatures to at least demand an official meeting. But a hollow sadness settled over them. Why should it take so much effort, so many arguments, just to safeguard their child? Why couldn't empathy be the simplest solution? Part of Diana yearned to scream at Moren, to let her know what it was like to stand helpless while your child seized, terrified, in broad daylight. Another part wanted to fold into herself, to cry over the injustice of having to fight tooth and nail for basic humanity. As Toby slept peacefully in his room that night, Diana and William vowed never to let their son down. They would go to the next HOA meeting, speak their truth, and force the board to recognize Toby's vulnerabilities. They clung to that resolve, unaware that tragedy loomed closer than they could possibly imagine. Because in Maplewood Estates, appearances mattered more than compassion. And as they would soon discover, indifference can be a silent, lethal force. The next HOA meeting took place in the community hall, a beige building with institutional lighting that hummed faintly overhead. Typically, these gatherings concern topics like mowing schedules, fence heights, and landscaping budgets. But as neighbors shuffled to their seats, it was obvious tonight's agenda held a deeper tension. Word had spread about Toby's health scare and the subsequent citation. People were curious whether the board would bend or double down. Diana and William arrived early, petition in hand, the edges curled from the heat of their sweaty palms. They wore determined expressions, matching the resolute energy thrumming in the room. In the front, behind a folding table, sat the HOA board. 3 members who stared with the practiced neutrality of local bureaucrats. At the center was Maureen Pollard, posture rigid, lips set in a thin line, as though daring anyone to challenge her authority. The meeting proceeded with mundane announcements, new speed bumps, lawn care updates, until at last, William raised his hand. We need to address the matter of the sign about our son's epilepsy, and the citation we received for it. Maureen tapped her pen on the table. Yes, that's next on the agenda. She cleared her throat. The board understands there has been some confusion, but as it stands, any signage on properties that is not pre-approved is a violation. You have 7 days to remove it. That's the rule. Diana's voice shook as she stood. Our child had a seizure in the street. You saw it, Maureen. We keep that sign for emergency awareness, so people can respond quickly if Toby collapses or goes into convulsions. Have you considered wearing a medical alert bracelet instead? Maureen retorted, surely that's enough. The comment sent a ripple of unease through the crowd. Some neighbors stared at their laps, unwilling to engage. Others looked at Diana and William with sympathy. Diana lifted the petition and held it out for the board to see. We have signatures from dozens of neighbors who support our right to keep the sign. Maureen barely glanced at the papers. I'm well aware of the petition, but the rules are rules, Mrs. Hadley. If we make exceptions for you, we have to do it for everyone. And before you know it, we'd be drowning in cluttered messages and disclaimers all over Maplewood Estates. A hush fell. William stepped closer to the front. We're talking about the life of a child. Our child. This isn't about some real estate sign or a political banner. It's crucial information. One of the other board members, an older man named Richard, cleared his throat. We sympathize with your situation. Truly we do. But we also have a responsibility to uphold community standards. Diana closed her eyes, inhaling sharply. Why can't the standard be about caring for one another? She asked softly, voice trembling. Maureen set down her pen and folded her arms. Because that's not in the HOA bylaws, she replied, as if reading a line from a policy manual. Her tone carried an air of finality that made Diana's blood run cold. Tempers flared. Some neighbors shouted in protest. Others looked away, afraid to incite Maureen's wrath. Ultimately, the board's ruling was firm. The sign had to come down, or the Hadleys would face escalating fines. After the meeting, Diana and William walked out in disbelief, hearts heavy with resentment. Behind them, Maureen tidied her papers with methodical calm, ignoring the glares and whispers. 2 days later, Toby insisted on returning to his normal routines, biking around the block, playing in the driveway. Diana insisted he only ride when she or William could supervise, worried sick. Despite Toby's pleas for independence, his parents hovered more than ever. They needed to ensure no one dismissed him in a critical moment again. But one afternoon, when Diana ran inside to grab some water, Toby pedaled a bit farther than usual. The scorching sun overhead and the summer humidity weighed on him. At the end of the street, he paused, feeling a strange tingle along his fingertips. His vision blurred, and the edges of his world began to dim. He recognized the warning signs of an impending seizure and pulled off to the side, leaning his bike against a tall hedge. He fumbled for his phone, but his hand was shaking too badly to dial. The next house over belonged to the Tisdales, an older couple who had always smiled kindly at Toby. Yet, he saw no sign of them now. Toby's heart pounded. He wanted to scream for help, but fear clamped down on his voice. Just as his knees buckled, he caught a fleeting glimpse of a figure crossing the street. It was Maureen, stepping out of her car. Help! Toby managed to utter before his legs gave out. He collapsed onto the grass, body jolting with the start of a seizure. Maureen hesitated, looking taken aback. She glanced up and down the street, presumably to see if anyone else was around. Toby's hearing wavered, muffled by the tumult within his own body. He caught fragments of the older woman's voice, but her words were scolding, not comforting. "Oh, for goodness sake," she snapped. "Can't you just keep yourself together?" She seemed reluctant to approach. Then she let out a loud sigh and strode over with rushed steps. "Get up," she ordered. "You're fine. I don't have time for this." But Toby wasn't responding. His limbs jerked uncontrollably, eyes rolling back. The seizure was in full swing. Moren bent over him. Frustration etched across her face, as though she were merely dealing with a rebellious child staging a tantrum. "Stop this," she said through clenched teeth. "Your parents will blame me, and I'm not." She broke off, startled, as Toby's arm swung violently and hit her clipboard. The force made the clipboard clatter onto the driveway. She recoiled, looking appalled. It was unclear whether she was more shaken by Toby's condition or the idea of being physically touched in the midst of it. Still, she didn't call 911. Instead, she hissed under her breath, "I told your parents to watch you. This is not my job." With that, she stood and hurried into her house, leaving Toby sprawled on the grass. Moments later, Diana emerged from her front door, carrying 2 bottles of water. She realized Toby wasn't in the driveway and felt her stomach twist. She called his name, scanning the street, spotting a flash of neon from Toby's bike near the Tisdale's hedge. She dashed down the sidewalk. By the time she reached him, Toby lay silent. Only the faintest movement of his chest signaled he was still alive. The aftermath of a severe seizure had left him limp, face pale as chalk. Diana's screams pierced the air. Neighbors came running. Yet again, it was mild-mannered Mildred Chong who whipped out her phone to call for help. Moren was nowhere in sight, despite her car parked just yards away. By the time the paramedics arrived, Toby's pulse was faint. His breath came in ragged bursts. Toby was rushed to the hospital in critical condition. Diana, frantic, sat by his side in the ambulance, tears streaming as paramedics fought to stabilize him. On the sidewalk, William stood stunned, left behind to follow in his own car. He could see neighbors gathering, murmuring among themselves, but all he wanted was to hold his son and see him open his eyes. As Toby's tiny frame slipped in and out of consciousness, a chilling thought descended like a dark cloud over Diana. Maybe if Moren had acted sooner, Toby would be safe right now. By the time William reached the hospital, Toby was already in the pediatric intensive care unit. The doctors were grim-faced, explaining that Toby's second seizure had been more severe and prolonged, what they sometimes termed as status epilepticus, where the seizure doesn't stop or recurs so quickly it becomes life-threatening. Toby's body was under tremendous stress, and immediate intervention was critical. Diana sat beside Toby's bed, hands clenched around his small, motionless fingers. The beep of monitors and the hiss of the ventilator filled the room. Medical staff hurried in and out, adjusting dosages and taking notes. Every so often, Toby's eyelids fluttered, but he remained largely unresponsive. William pressed his forehead against the doorframe, overwhelmed by guilt and helplessness. If only he'd insisted on riding with Toby. If only he hadn't let him bike out of sight for even a moment. These were the same thoughts looping in Diana's mind. But beneath that self-blame was a simmering rage at Moren. The paramedics had found Toby alone on the grass, with no evidence that anyone attempted to call for help before Diana discovered him. The hospital staff confirmed it. Had Toby received prompt medical aid, he might have avoided the more damaging complications. The hours crawled. Morning turned into afternoon, and eventually night fell. William dozed in an uncomfortable chair beside Toby's bed, while Diana paced the corridor, updating concerned family members over the phone. At one point, an officer arrived, looking for Diana and William. One of the paramedics had reported possible negligence. Someone had seen Moren walk away while Toby was seizing. "Would you like to file an official complaint?" the officer asked. "Because if this is confirmed, it could be grounds for criminal negligence." Diana and William exchanged stricken looks, while anger coursed through them. Pressing charges seemed like a far-off thought compared to the urgency of Toby's condition. "Let's see if Toby pulls through," William murmured. "Then we'll decide." Days went by with little improvement. Toby lay in a medically induced coma at times, to reduce the risk of further seizures. The heartbreak was almost unbearable, and each day, a new wave of frustration rose. The doctors mentioned the possibility of brain damage if Toby didn't wake soon, or if his oxygen levels had been compromised during the seizure. Diana felt as though she were drowning in ifs, each one more terrifying than the last. Neighbors texted and called, offering support, some sincerely, others out of curiosity. Mildred Chong visited the hospital more than once, bringing homemade soup and gentle reassurance. She also passed on bits of gossip from Maplewood Estates, including how Moren was trying to distance herself from the incident, claiming she had arrived too late to do anything and that Toby was already unconscious. The paramedics' report disagreed with her statements. Finally, after nearly a week, Toby's condition worsened. His brain began showing abnormal swelling, and the neurology team prepared Diana and William for the possibility that Toby might not pull through. On a stormy evening, under the flicker of fluorescent lights and the hum of the ventilator, Toby's small heart gave out. Despite the nurses' valiant efforts and the doctors racing to administer every possible intervention, Toby's body went still. Diana's scream reverberated through the hallway, raw and primal. William buried his face in his hands, tears pouring. Their beloved son had slipped away, leaving a yawning chasm where his laughter once echoed. The hospital staff bowed their heads. Some wept quietly, having grown attached to the brave little boy over the days he fought for his life. Word spread back in Maplewood Estates like wildfire. A few neighbors lit candles on their porches or placed small stuffed animals near the Hadley home as a sign of mourning. Mildred organized a small vigil for Toby. But overshadowing the community's grief was a growing outrage. Rumors circulated that Maureen Pollard had discovered Toby during his seizure and had chosen not to call 911. When Diana and William returned from the hospital, hearts hollow, they were met by a swarm of neighbors asking questions, offering condolences, or, uncomfortably, stirring up drama. Diana couldn't handle it. She locked herself inside, clutching Toby's beloved baseball cap, refusing to eat or sleep. William turned away well-meaning visitors, politely but firmly, wanting only to grieve in peace. But the parents' heartbreak soon ignited into determination. A day after Toby's death, a police detective visited their home, gently explaining that if Maureen had indeed witnessed Toby in the midst of a seizure and chosen to walk away, she could be charged with neglect or even involuntary manslaughter. Witnesses were corroborating the account. William's voice shook with fury. "I want justice," he said simply. "If her negligence cost our son his life, then she has to answer for it." Diana, her cheeks streaked with silent tears, nodded vigorously. "We'll press charges," she whispered. "We owe it to Toby." Within days, a formal investigation was launched. Statements were taken from neighbors who'd seen Maureen near Toby during the seizure, as well as from the paramedics who arrived to find Toby alone. Some residents admitted they feared retaliation from the HOA president, but their conscience wouldn't let them stay silent any longer. The story was soon picked up by local news outlets. Maplewood Estates' child dies after seizure is ignored. Maureen tried to control the narrative, issuing a statement that Toby was already unresponsive when she found him and that she rushed inside to call for help. But call logs didn't back up her story. Number 911 call had come from Maureen's phone or her home address at the time of the emergency. The stark truth stood out. She had seen Toby in distress and done nothing. Meanwhile, Diana and William, though consumed by grief, met with an attorney to understand their options. Criminal charges would be at the discretion of the district attorney, but a civil suit was also possible. Maureen could be held liable for wrongful death. More importantly, the Hadleys wanted to set a precedent that indifference to a child's medical crisis wasn't something a rulebook or petty personal bias could justify. The tension in Maplewood Estates reached a boiling point. Some residents demanded Maureen's resignation from the HOA board. Others tried to shield her, claiming the press was blowing everything out of proportion. And in the midst of it all, Toby's name hung in the air like a ghost, a tragic reminder of how fleeting and precious life could be. At the funeral, A small, solemn gathering took place at a local church. White lilies decorated the sanctuary, and Toby's tiny casket was surrounded by his favorite stuffed animals. The heartbreak was unspeakable. As the pastor said a final prayer, Diana clung to William, who could barely keep himself standing. Moren was nowhere to be seen. The neighbors who did attend were subdued, tears in their eyes, many still in disbelief that such tragedy had befallen a bright, sweet child, for reasons that felt as preventable as they were cruel. After the service, the Hadleys emerged with tear-streaked faces and squared shoulders. They had Toby's memory to carry forward, and a legal battle to fight. In the weeks following Toby's funeral, Maplewood Estates transformed from a pristine suburban utopia into a tense battleground. Lawn signs popped up, but not the kind Moren was used to. Some said, "Justice for Toby." Others bore messages like "Children's lives, HOA rules." Despite Moren's best efforts, the board couldn't issue citations fast enough to quell the outrage. It was as if Toby's tragic death had catalyzed a wave of dissent against petty, indifferent governance. The district attorney's office moved forward with filing charges against Maureen Pollard for negligent homicide, arguing that her willful failure to render aid contributed significantly to Toby's death. The evidence was damning. Eyewitness accounts placed her at the scene, logs proved she never called 911, and paramedics testified Toby's outcome might have been different if medical intervention had occurred sooner. Moren hired an expensive defense attorney who specialized in defamation and property law. They released statements painting her as a victim of community hysteria. She claimed that fear had overwhelmed her in a moment, that she'd panicked and run inside to get help, but somehow never completed the call. The attorney argued that while Moren's actions might have been ill-advised, they didn't meet the threshold of criminal negligence. The trial drew local media attention. Reporters lined the courthouse steps, filming as Diana and William arrived each day, faces drawn with grief. Inside the courtroom, a hush fell whenever either parent took the stand. Diana's testimony was especially heartrending. She described how Toby had always been a bright, curious child, and how his condition required community awareness. Tears blurred her voice as she recounted the first time Moren dismissed Toby's seizures as drama. And the final day, she found her boy alone, collapsed on a patch of grass with no one to help him. William, in his turn, spoke of the heartbreak of watching Toby's monitors beep slower and slower in the hospital. "We're not here because we want revenge," he told the court, voice quivering. "We're here because someone needed to pick up the phone and save her child. And they didn't." Moren, when she testified, maintained her innocence, though her cold demeanor on the stand did little to earn sympathy. She insisted she'd had every intention of calling 911 once she got inside her house. The prosecutor pointed out the phone records again, the glaring absence of any attempt. Cross-examination revealed contradictions in Moren's timeline. It became clear she'd been more concerned about Toby faking than she was about saving his life. Outside the courthouse, supporters of the Hadleys held up signs, while a smaller group, relatives or friends of Moren, claimed the charges were excessive. The defense tried to argue that Maplewood Estates had become a hotbed of emotional fervor and that the HOA was being unfairly targeted. But the public discourse overwhelmingly sided with the grieving parents. In the end, the jury found Moren guilty of negligent homicide, a verdict that sent a resounding message that turning a blind eye to a child in medical crisis was inexcusable. On sentencing day, the judge spoke sternly. "The tragedy here is compounded by the fact that such a little effort, placing a simple call to emergency services, might have saved a life. Let this serve as a reminder that one's responsibilities toward one's community aren't negated by personal biases or convenience." Moren was sentenced to time in county jail, along with substantial fines and mandatory community service upon release. For Diana and William, the verdict was bittersweet. No legal outcome could bring Toby back, but at least there was acknowledgement that their son's life mattered. They pursued a civil suit against Moren as well, intending to donate any damages awarded to epilepsy research and community awareness programs. The lawsuit resulted in a settlement, though the dollar figure felt meaningless compared to Toby's absence. In Maplewood Estates, Maureen's removal from the HOA board was swift once she was convicted. The neighborhood, grappling with guilt and sorrow, began to rewrite its regulations, adding clauses for medical accommodations and emergency exemptions. Diana and William continued living in their home, at least for a time, unsure if they could ever truly move on, but determined to honor Toby's memory. They turned his bedroom into a quiet place for reflection, a small shrine to a child who loved dinosaurs, puzzle games, and bright neon sneakers. On certain evenings, Diana would stand in the driveway and look down the street, haunted by the memory of Toby pedaling away on his bike, ready to explore the world. Sometimes she'd hear the echo of his laughter in the wind, or imagine his curious face peeking around the hedge. In those moments, tears would spill silently, an ache that no passage of time could erase. But each tear was matched by resolve. The Hadleys volunteered with local child welfare groups, telling Toby's story as a cautionary tale of what indifference can cost. They lobbied for legislation requiring mandatory reporting and assistance laws, so no one else could claim ignorance or convenience while a vulnerable person lay dying. A year later, a commemorative plaque was placed near the corner where Toby had his last seizure. Engraved were the words, "In loving memory of Toby Hadley, who reminded us that a simple act of care can save a life." People from neighboring communities visited, reading the plaque and reflecting on how a phone call or small kindness might change everything. Maplewood Estates, once obsessed with outward appearances, now bore a deeper understanding. No well-trimmed lawn or strict regulation could ever replace genuine compassion. And so, Toby's legacy became one of unity, reminding everyone that being neighbors means more than just sharing a zip code. It means looking out for each other, especially in life's most fragile moments. No measure of suburban perfection was worth the price paid by one precious child's life. Toby's story, heartbreaking and cruel in its final chapters, became a spark that awakened the neighborhood to the essential, inescapable duty of human empathy. Diana and William would carry their grief forever. But in the faces of the people whose hearts had been stirred, they found flickers of hope. In that hope lay the belief that Toby's memory would guide them toward a future where another child's seizure wouldn't be met with doubt or dismissal, but with immediate, life-saving action. The end.